this video, I'm going to go over the Declaration of Independence. We're going to go ahead and break it down in its pieces and kind of explain each part of it. This goes along with the Dissecting the Declaration of Independence handout that we did in class together. So if you've missed any part of it, this video will help kind of fill in whatever questions you might be missing, or it just works as a review of the Declaration of Independence, all of the different parts to it and the meaning for each one. So when we take a look at the Declaration of Independence, the beginning or the introduction is known as the preamble, right? Just like the Constitution has a preamble, and we'll look at that a little bit later when we get to it. But the preamble of the Declaration of Independence is the introduction that the Founding Fathers wrote before they sent this document to King George and pretty much the rest of the world to declare their official break from Britain. So the preamble reads, "When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to separation." And basically what they're saying here is that when it's come to the fact that a group of people need to break away and form their own country, the right thing to do is to explain the reasons why. So in your handout, when you're looking to summarize what the preamble is telling us, that's pretty much the summary of it. That when it comes for a group of people to break away from their country and to form their own, the right thing to do is to explain why. And at any time during this video, feel free to pause and rewind to be able to get the information you need to complete your handout if needed. So the purpose of this introduction is exactly that, is to explain why they are breaking away from Britain, why they are forming their own country. So that pretty much is that section of the Declaration of Independence. That's that introduction, which is known as the preamble. Then we move into what's known as the Declaration of Human Rights, right? And this really becomes probably the most well-known aspect of the Declaration of Independence, because it's here where we start off saying, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." And so in this section with the Declaration of Human Rights, right, unalienable, what do we mean by that? It means that these are rights that cannot be taken away, right? Rights that you're born with, so they cannot be taken away by anyone. And the unalienable rights that are specifically expressed in the Declaration of Independence are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? Reflecting John Locke's natural rights, known as life, liberty, and property, the founders then adjusted those to fit their needs. And so from our point of view, our unalienable rights, as declared in the Declaration of Independence, are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, this section goes on further to explain that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. So further on, they're going to explain that these governments that are created by people, right, they get their power, they obtain their power from the consent of the governed, right? It's from the people agreeing to follow the laws of these governments. So from the consent of the governed, do governments obtain their powers. And this section establishes the social contract, because this section pretty much is defining what a social contract is. They are saying that governments are created because the people have agreed to follow their laws. But whenever those governments become destructive, whenever those governments now are failing to protect those unalienable rights, then the people have a right to create a new one, which by definition is the social contract. So they are defining the social contract, saying this is how a government works. So a social contract exists because by definition, that is how a government functions. We give the government power by agreeing to follow it. That's the consent of the governed. The government then in turn agrees to protect our rights. When they fail to do that, then we have a right to institute a new one. And that's leading into that next question. How does a government break the social contract? When it becomes destructive, when it no longer protects those unalienable rights, a government now has broken its part of the social contract. So continuing in this section of the Declaration of Human Rights, right now the Founding Fathers have defined the social contract. They've defined the way a government works. So they move further to say, prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them to under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. So here the Founding Fathers are saying, we've defined what a social contract is, and that when the government no longer is following it, when it breaks its social contract, we have the ability to create a new one. However, we're not saying that it should be done lightly, right? We should not be just instituting new governments on whims. There needs to be a real deep cause for changing a government that has been established for a very long time. And so they further go on to say, we have been experiencing a long train of injustices made by the king. And because of that, it is why we're saying that we should be able to create a new government that actually will protect our future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. So why did the colonists believe they needed to explain their theory of government? They needed to explain what a social contract was, because they wanted everyone to know that they weren't just separating from Britain on a whim. They were separating from Britain because they believed that the social contract was broken. The King of Britain was not protecting their rights, and by definition, they had a right to create a new one. Right? So that justifies their Declaration of Independence. They no longer feel that the government, the King of Great Britain, King George, is no longer really protecting their natural rights. And so by definition of the social contract, the contract is broken and they have a right to institute a new government that will protect those rights. This particular section from the Declaration of Human Rights is seen within the views of Thomas Paine, because that's exactly what he wrote in his pamphlet of Common Sense. When he wrote Common Sense to try and persuade the colonists to join together to separate from Britain, that's exactly what he was saying in his pamphlet. So his views are reflective in this whole entire section of the Declaration of Human Rights by saying that all of the different things that Great Britain has done to us, all of these injuries that have been done to us through the taxes and through the acts that they have passed, are not protecting our rights. Great Britain has broken its social contract, and we should separate and declare our independence and establish a new government. So the next section of the Declaration of Independence is known then as the list of grievances, right? Because here the last line sets off, to prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. And so the next section of the grievances is actually just a list of all of the different things that Great Britain has done to them up till now. And so on your sheet of paper, right, you have a section here for the list of main colonial grievances. So there's a list of 7 and then a list of 5 of the most serious grievances, because the way that the Declaration is broken down is that they list the grievances leading up to the most serious of them. So here, what I've done is shown you the section in the textbook, which is a lot easier to find because it's through the bullets, so it's much easier to get down these grievances this way. So these first 7 are the main colonial grievances, the ones that the king has refused to approve necessary laws, imposing those taxes without consent, quartering soldiers, suspending trial by jury, limiting judicial power, sending royal officials and colonists for trial in Britain, suspending or dissolving the legislatures, right? These are all of the 7 main colonial grievances. But then we also have the remaining 5, which are known as the very serious grievances at the end, which basically is that the king has cut off colonist trade, right? By closing the harbor, all trade to the colonies pretty much came to a halt. He made war on the colonies, right? Once we get to the writing of the Declaration of Independence, technically the colonies are at war because the battles of Lexington and Concord had already occurred, so they're still fighting. And he's hired foreign mercenaries, right, to fight against them. He did hire those German soldiers, the Hessians, to fight along the British army in the colonies. He's ordered the burning down of towns, and he's also tried to have all of the Native Americans around the colonists to try and revolt against them and start war upon them, which really ended up having a split decision there because you had some Native American groups that sided with the colonists and some that did join the British. But these are the list of grievances that should be listed on your sheet of paper to be able to identify what were some of those main ones and what were some of those serious grievances that the colonists were talking about. And that leads us to the final portion of the Declaration of Independence, which is known as the redress. We're getting to the last 2 parts. The redress, and redress pretty much means just to make remedy, to try and make better. And here the colonists shortly state, in every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. So in this section, right, the colonists felt it was important that they had tried numerous times to come to a peaceful resolution after these grievances, and they had been ignored every single time. So they have no other object than to go ahead and actually break free, right? They have no other choice now than to separate themselves. And they wanted to make sure that Britain and the rest of the world knew that they tried to peacefully keep their relationship with Britain. They tried to peacefully find a remedy to the problems, but they had been ignored at every instance and only met with further injury by further acts and further punishments being placed upon them. And so that pushed them to the fact that we've been driven to this choice and we have no other choice but to declare our independence. And that leads us to the conclusion of the Declaration, which states, "We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, do, in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do." So with that final declaration that they are formally breaking away and establishing themselves as their own independent country, the colonies wanted to make sure that they highlighted the fact that now as free and independent states, they have the full power to levy war. Since war was already happening, well, now we have the ability to levy war however we see fit. We have the ability to find alliances with other countries to help us, and we have the ability to conclude peace whenever we are ready to find peace that we find that is suited to us. So they have the ability to independently do these things on their own, not dependent on Britain. So they're going to wage war how they see fit. They will find those alliances and they will conduct peace once they have reached their goal to being independent. So this is the breakdown of the Declaration of Independence and all its parts, and this should help you be able to complete our dissecting handout if you have not, and a good review for the Declaration. All right, thanks for watching.